what to do with next Sunday, because I know I just won't be able to I won't be able to function. I won't be here next Sunday. And I had talked with Norm earlier, and he and I said we could do some of this as we go along and do this together. Maybe he would want to come and do a session and kind of take it, because today we're really discussing this last question here. Now, this I think is really, when we end this section, this is now the beginning really of then looking really further into discipleship, because these are actually what we're asked in the most basics to say what we will do. So one of the things I did want to ask you is, after today, again, just kind of look let me back up a little bit, about far as next Sunday, just look what's going to be in the bulletin and everything to see. There's a possibility we might not have it and you take a Sunday off, or maybe something will be offered, maybe Norm or somebody else, I'm not sure, we'll see. But I'll be back on the next Sunday, by the way, is November 6th, which is All Saints Sunday. And one of the things that's really good about with what we're doing, it is a major celebration of Feast of the Church. For those who have, and for those of you who've lived or maybe know what the calendar of the church it is, but for some people I know it's not a big thing, and I know for me and my background, we would have never, first of all, anything in the Baptist church about saying saints is just, a big no-no. And then second, to actually then celebrate that and to celebrate all the saints, and the fact that really, it's amazing what they've turned around into things like Halloween is our derivative of All Hallows Eve. All holy, the sanctified, the eve of all the holy ones. And I might just take a minute a little sidetrack here. I know that's shocking, but a little sidetrack. That with the whole thing, Halloween and everything, it was started and has always been a Christian celebration and holy day. And where some of the things that we get today, it's just like Christmas. All of a sudden now you got Santa Claus and all that other stuff. Now we all know how some of that stuff gets entered in. Well, the same happened kind of with Halloween. Halloween was really just a thing where you went to church, and it was common in some areas of the world and cultures that developed a sense, and I know this happened in Spain, and it also happened in some Celtic regions would do this. Because it was the day before all the saints, on that evening at sundown, because when you get to sundown, that's the beginning of the next day. You're technically kind of going into All Saints. They would gather close to that, and they would process. Now, this is not everywhere, but this is a tradition that did happen in the church. They would process from the church to the cemetery. Now, for some places, cemetery, and a lot of it was right around the church. So they would just process outside, and they would come out, and many of the people would wear symbols of death, like maybe a thing with a skeleton or things that are death. And you got to remember, people years ago, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, were much more, death was just in your face. We like to avoid it, not talk about it and all that. But these people, many of them, if they lived to be 50, they were grateful. And people just died. If you you ever look at old tombstones and you see the skull and crossbones on there and you're like, ugh. But they're like, part of it's like, it's death and it's a symbol of it, and part of it's mocking it. Because what the Christians would do would come out, and quite often, many times they would take a tomb, which the altar in many ways is like a tomb, the tomb of Christ, and they would go out in the symbol, the place of death, think like the cross, death, and all that. They would go out to the place of death, and they would celebrate the Eucharist in the middle of the tombs, in the middle of death, and say, we mock death because it doesn't get the last word. And we come out and celebrate. And there were some of those emblems that would do, and it developed, of course, with certain cultures, different ways and countries. And then eventually, like a lot of things, all you need is a commercial company to take on to something. And boom! You got Halloween and candy and trick-or-treat. So, but there's a long history with that. But just remember that, things that we do, many of them do have actually a wonderful history to them. And that's getting, again, back to All Saints. When we do All Saints Day, it's also one of the big days in which you would have baptisms. And if you do not have baptism, so here's where it comes back to what we have done. We are going to renew all of our baptismal vows. So we will do that together on November 6th. And I think after having a discussion like this, when we come to those, with all that you've probably had going through your head as we discuss this, it may be really interesting when you make those vows and promises again, what maybe comes into your heart and your head, you know? So think about that and prepare that on November 6th, we will all do that together. So, okay. Yes.
With regard to what to do after, is it my understanding as a new Episcopalian, Bishop Curry's term is ending soon?
That's correct.
And there will be a selection of a new
presiding bishop.
Primate. Would talking about that process, how that happens in the Episcopal Church, be of interest to anyone else?
I mean, we could talk. It wouldn't take too long. Probably just one time, one session, because it is a church-wide thing. But in the end, it's the decision of the House of Bishops. But I can do that because I was actually at the General Convention when Catherine Jefferts Shores was picked and announced and elected. And I have to admit, it was being there. I will say one experience of that was incredible. When you're in a room, it was on the floor of the House of Deputies, which remember the House of Deputies has people from every diocese in the Episcopal Church, and each diocese has 4 lay people and 4 clergy. Okay, so there's a lot of people on this floor, and then there's all the guests, and then all of the House of Bishops came in, and everybody else came in. And when they made this announcement, Catherine Jefferts Shores was the dark horse candidate that they kind of went, oh, it's really nice. They had nominated a woman. Isn't that sweet? And we know she has no chance in hell. And that was really the thing. I remember because I was in the Diocese of Missouri. I was a deputy in the clergy order. We met in the hotel room every day and talked about what was going on. And the bishop said, I remember our bishop goes, there's just something as we began this process. It just really hits home to me. She really has, I think, what we need. And he goes, but I don't think we have any votes for that. And he said, you never know, maybe there's other bishops feel like I do. Well, when they got it, and we knew the 2 other people who were going to probably get it, and we were waiting for that. And when they came in, and the president of the House of Deputies said, I'd like to announce our newest presiding bishop, Catherine Jefferts Shores, there was first a moment of just dead silence, and then this incredible roar of applause. And what was really interesting for me was to watch the women who were there, who, for many of them, we've come a long way. Many of them, so churches a lot of day are still treated barely as second class. And I watched these lay women, I watched some clergy women, and then there were 3 Episcopal nuns who happened to be standing over by me. I've never seen nuns flip out. One of them, I think her habit came off once or her head came off a couple of times, but literally jumping in the air, singing, going, Alleluia, 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 and tears rolling down their face. That even though there were all these men bishops at the time, that this woman they felt was the one who should lead. And not because she was a woman, but because she really was, like as my bishop said, the one. And people were shocked by it. So I'll just say that was an incredible experience. And to be able to watch people who've often, I was excited about it because I really liked her. I was like, she's deep. And nobody's going to mess with her. And, but to see those who've often been left out, to see that, the Spirit breaks through. So, we can talk about some of that and some other things. Also, bring up any other topics too, because and you can tell me. Go ahead.
It's running way back when my wife just got married. Mm-hmm. We were down in Salt Lake, going to the bayou. We were still kind of sort of Mormon, and just some guy walked up and said, "Oh, hey, sir, just ordained I'm off to a service to ordain a woman bishop." You know, I don't know if it was Episcopalian or not. Or,
Probably.
that's what I think. It's like probably, you know. So I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. You know, like it's like, how's that not a? I don't know. It was just really kind of cool. Like,
women are now. It's so interesting. I remember when the first woman was elected, and now what's been really odd is in the last 4 years, the overwhelming majority of bishops who've been elected, over 80% have been women. And some of the other bishops have been talking, and I remember even Bishop Hayashi was somebody said, "I am quickly becoming a minority as a male." And he said, you know, and there's some of us, there's a thing you go like, it's not the good old boys club necessarily anymore. But you know, and the thing about it is what I found is the male bishops do not feel threatened by this, but see that the person, it's not about being male or female, but they're being called because they're being called as pastoral leaders because they've shown already that leadership. So I remember, I'm going to say, because, you know, I went to the seminary that still does not allow women to celebrate sacraments at the altar. And, okay, yeah. When Catherine Jeffert Shores came to our seminary at Nashotah House, she preached, but she did not celebrate. And she was much more, I was furious and said, as presiding bishop, no, you should not put up with that. But instead of trying to push and say, well, I'm in charge and authority, she said, I'm going to just take a step. They've invited me to preach, and I'll be gracious. And I think, you know, and I'm like, yeah, she showed the more leadership and pastoral way and said, I'm not going to try to push your buttons, but I'm going to just accept what you offer graciously. And I think that was good. And I remember when we elected the Bishop of San Diego as a woman, and I had to deal, though, and I'm going to be honest, I had the little parts of me that I went, a woman as a bishop? This is, and I kept thinking, this is weird. Women look funny with miters on. And then I went, oh God, men look horrible with miters on. It's like, it's just the hair's different. Get over it. You know? So, you know, everybody, you have to do your adjustments. Yeah, you know. So, okay. Well, the page 30, is it 4? Mm-hmm. This kind of is a culmination, this last statement there, it's kind of a culmination of really kind of, in a sense, what we've talked about in all of them, in the sense of when it says, will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? I will with God's help. Okay. It's pretty big. I'm going to say, first of all, I want to start with you all. What do you think it's either saying to you, or what does it mean for you? Or how do we live that in our daily lives as disciples? Take your time.
I struggle with the justice part because, you know, there are times when I'm very righteous about they have to pay for what they did. They need to change to produce justice. And there's not a lot of love involved when I say stuff like that. So it's a tension between justice for the good of all and not being so down on the people who were responsible for the injustice.
I think that's a good point, because there's a thing in here that's tempered in two ways. And if you'll notice, the third word is strive. It says, will you strive? It doesn't mean that you're always going to do it, but it says that, and it's an interesting word they picked, will you strive? We don't use that a lot. But will you strive for peace and for justice and peace among all people? Now, by doing that, that sometimes means, though, the prophet voice. And we know the prophets were not always liked, and Jesus acted as a prophet to his own people and was crucified for it. And if we then therefore try to do the same example of trying to stand up for justice, there's the part, it says after that says among all people, comma, and respect the dignity of every human being. Part of it means is if you're called to do justice and peace, but you're also supposed to respect. So there's a sense of a call to a prophetic ministry, but you don't do it at the expense of writing off people's humanity, and that you respect the dignity of all people. And that is hard. It's a lot easier for me to say, da 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 da, and like, I mean, you take Ukraine and I'm like, boot those Russians out, blah, 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 blah. And I have, all these things I can fire off, or about almost any other issue, and we can. But then I have to think about, well, what does that mean in the human toll? What does that mean? And how we do that. Is mercy tempering justice? Now, that doesn't mean that we lessen the call of justice, because I also think that it also doesn't take away the things for accountability. So if damages is done, the part of and we said there's that whole thing of the mission of the church is living into God, reconciling the world to himself and to one another. Well, if it's reconciliation is hard when you still have accountability, because if we're going to say when these places, I mean, think about what Archbishop Desmond Tutu did in this Commission on Reconciliation in South Africa. Can you imagine how hard it is to bring people in who say, you've hurt us, you've done this to us, you've done this, and feeling angry, and then having the person across from you who does this, but then you also saying, I also know that you're a human being and that you've hurt and there's reasons where you are. And then for them to recognize the pain they've done to them. That type of reconciliation is rare. And I'm not saying how much it happened over there. And there's still a lot of pain, but reconciliation is not easy. And I think that's somewhat at the core of this. Because I do think that as a church, and sometimes it's not always popular, and I mean, in my sermon I alluded that, how we often scapegoat the poor. Some people might say that's a political statement. Oh, well, a lot of things that Jesus said people could say is a political statement. And maybe it is, but it's one that I think is clear that the Christian gospel calls us to. And that Jesus said, of whom do we lift up? So, yeah, this whole thing about striving for justice and peace, it's hard. It's a lot easier maybe in what we think in our daily lives in the parish, where it becomes the part where it seems unattainable as we start thinking about across the world and all the problems of the world. What do we do in Ukraine? Are we going to have a nuclear war? Are we, why are 2 million, just starting at 2 million at least, right now Somalia is starving, but no one seems to be interested in helping send food or any kind of aid. It becomes overwhelming.
Can I also address, without trying to throw a hand grenade
No,
in the middle of this,
please.
the dignity of every human being?
Mm-hmm.
When you send out Bishop Curry's letter at the end of July, whatever it was, when the Dobbs decision, I just went over the top because he was grieving for loss of rights, and you can put that in quotes or not, but nobody seemed to be grieving for the lives of the unborn.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you for adding the link, and I actually did go through the stuff. So there is really stuff in the Episcopal, whatever it is, because I'm Methodist, so I don't remember. All of the bylaws, if you will, or whatever, saying, we encourage, to carry children to term, and we try to counsel and that sort of thing. But there doesn't really seem to be, where there's grief for people in Somalia, but is there grief for these children who are being aborted? Mm-hmm. So I think Maya Angelou said that it was her grandmother's phrase, if you can't change something, change the way you think about it. I know I'm not going to change my idea about abortion. How do I change my way of thinking about
Mm-hmm.
this and justice, dignity,
Mm-hmm.
human life?
Mm. And you know, I really appreciate you saying what you're doing and hopefully feeling comfortable enough to do that and realize and I hope nobody else is feeling that we judge you for that in any way, or somebody who says, no matter what those views may be, but you know, I know this has been a very difficult thing for us in the church, that we say, and we do, and we value life, and no one is saying we think you should all go out and have abortions or any other thing like that. That's not what we are saying. The one thing, and I'm not going to try to defend the presiding bishop or anything, but I think his major thing was just saying the step that we're taking in our nation, that I'm kind of grieving what it's leading to and what it can do to what we've said as a nation, and that we will instill about under the understanding of rights for people. And they had already set a precedence, and now taking rights away that have been given is so much more difficult than, taking away than giving. And I think it was just saying how this was done was probably not the best. And that's his thinking. And but I know there's a lot of people that have different views. And, if you talk to me even personally, I'm not in favor of abortion. I hope no one has to. I will, in the end, believe that, in respecting also your dignity, that I know that there's sometimes difficult decisions that women have to make. And what I'm going to do is just say, I respect you. And what we do is encourage in the church is, if you're in that, you can come to me, or and if it's not me, I can refer you. You want to talk, and what it is that's you're carrying, because that's a burden. It's left to you to make this decision, and to pray with them and help them find what is hopefully the best decision. And in the end, I have to let go of the judgment and say they have to make their own decision. And I will say I will respect that. But I also know the thought of loss of anyone is difficult.
Yeah.
But I think you're bringing, I appreciate you saying that.
I tend to feel that abortion is being used as a solution of last resort for tragedies that people can't find a better solution for. That doesn't mean that it's a good solution, even if people are finding that it's the only one they can find. I find it offensive that there doesn't seem to be a big political push for finding ways for people to reduce the need for those solutions of last resort. That there's so many of them that are happening, not because it's somehow some sort of neat and tidy solution to a problem, that it's covering up some other problem that society isn't prioritizing, such as mortality for when women give birth. I can't remember the technical name for it. There's a tidy name that I'm not remembering. But I think it was in the news, like 84% of the mortality related to childbirth in the United States is preventable. That there's groups of people that we've intentionally not provided health care for.
Yeah, the prenatal care.
Yeah, prenatal,
Is a
yeah.
big deal.
The prenatal care, the postnatal care, that there's all these elements of healthcare that aren't being provided. And then we turn around and say, oh, well, an abortion is important because all these people who might be at risk with their lives if they carry a baby to term. And I'm like, well, yes, I see the point on that side of it, but I also see that 84% of these deaths are preventable, and it's the result of society deciding that some people's lives and health just really isn't that important to us.
Well,
And
quite often, it's been left down to where we've put it in the political terms of saying it's either bad, you can't do it, there's no such thing as abortion. But then they say, well, if we don't do it, then what are we going to do? It just nothing. So you often then leave the poor and some of the women and other people left out. And on the end, if we just say, well, it's just open, who cares, do it. And I don't like either. The thing is they have found, though, and this is one thing that just we can do on some statistics that we do know, is in places, and especially in places of more poverty and people of color and so forth, when they have provided good women's health care, to these people and given them education, things, reproductive rights and all of that, abortions go down.
Yeah.
So, I don't know why everybody's afraid of Planned Parenthood. And I'm not saying to please, I'm just saying that in many places they found that when they do a lot of the education, because they're not trying, people think, they want people to get aborted. No, that's not what they do. They just want to provide education and try to get health care. And then, and then I think women are capable of making much better decisions if they have the care they deserve. That's just, okay, thought from me, whatever it's worth. But that's a good point about coming up with dignity about everyone, and we have to think about all that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Jacob.
It's almost apropos that the gospel reading was what it was today, given our discussion today, because it kind of deals with the same thing. Like, striving for justice, in Jesus' times, necessitates calling out the horrendous evil and violence of the tax collector, because they're true, compared to the Pharisee, that tax collector did horrendously more abominable things than anything that Pharisee likely did in their life, The system required violence and oppression and suppression and all that stuff, but we still are asked to look at these two people, one of whom we could very easily say that's the bad guy, that's the enemy, and see in them a dignity and then a desire to, make amends and change their way of life and to respect that. But it puts us in a weird position, We talk about the Episcopal Church being the middle way between Catholicism and Protestantism, but it is kind of weird to be in that middle way between striving for justice but also respecting the dignity of the oppressor even. It can alienate you from both sides because, I don't know.
Well, thanks for listening to the sermon today. And, but and I know it wasn't published. Some of it, people are probably going where's he going with this? Because there is the sense of, and it is, the tax collector is the hero here. I mean, he is today. But we need to know who he really is. Okay, it's just real easy to go he's just he's a poor tax collector. But the thing of what it is Jesus is making the point so often. It's the women, the lepers, the outcasts, whatever it is, who get it. And it's often the stiff-necked own people who, because they get blinded by all the trappings around them, can't see what God is trying to do and being directly involved in your life. And it's those who have lost so much that when they find graciousness and love and forgiveness, will accept it because they just can't believe they're getting it. The tax collector knew that he had done these things and says, God, be merciful to me. And Jesus says he walked away. This man was the one who got it. And it just reminds us sometimes God forgives greatly, abundantly. And sometimes we may not like it. And of course, it's easy not to like the Pharisee. And one thing also about Pharisees, when we talk about Pharisees, the group of people whom Jesus was most closely theologically aligned with are the Pharisees. The Pharisees actually believed in, they talked about coming and living your life in the daily way and all these things. The reason he's so hard on them is because he said they should know better. He's going, you're getting caught in the same stuff that's led you astray before. They believed in the resurrection and all these other things, but they would also then go like this guy, but I thank you I'm not like all these other people. And Jesus is going he doesn't really know. So you'll often see, the disciples don't get it most of the time. The Pharisees usually don't get it because they're caught within the trappings of it. Instead of looking to God, they're caught in the things that lead them to God. And he keeps saying, it's just like the whole Sabbath, and is man made for the Sabbath, or Sabbath's made for the man? And he's kind of saying, you get lost in that. And he said, in the end, no, the Sabbath was made for us. And in the end, the human being matters first. So, but it's kind of hard. Yeah.
Well, I just kind of have a question that's brought to mind, and that's how we balance these two sometimes contradictory things at one moment, right? How do we provide a space for the oppressed where they can truly have healing, where they can truly experience community, where they can, truly have a place where they belong, that also doesn't exclude the very people that are oppressing them. Like, how do we do that? And I think part of it is on the side of, and when I say the oppressor, I mean even us, because we live in a society where even the smallest action that we do can harm others. Like, the jacket that I'm wearing was not probably made in the best factories with the,
My cell phone involves elements that were produced by child labor.
Yeah, and so with that being the case, I think there's definitely for us like a sense of, if we are the ones that are doing the hurting, we need to make amends. But like as a community, how do we balance those two sides of welcome? I don't know.
And I've seen some things, and these were kind of real things that got some public attention, but I've seen where it happens is a church that I served in San Diego was burned to the ground by an arsonist. And this is before I came. And the man was caught, and he did it out of spite. I mean, he wanted to burn that church to the ground. And so he did, and he had gone off to prison for a while. People in the congregation kind of became his family during prison, because his family completely rejected him. And we knew he also had some mental health challenges. And some people in the church said, I really want to hate him. I can't stand what he did. And my family gave that and this, and then they said, but I want to go find out who he is. And so they kind of did go through that, and some of these people got to know him over the years. And it was interesting, about 2 or 3 years after he got out, he began having conversations with the leadership, and he had gone through a lot of change and was getting help with his mental health illness and stuff. And he said, can I publicly come and repent? And can I ask for your forgiveness, or at least beginning of it? And unfortunately the church said yes, and did this hard job, but they brought this guy in, and he came up before the whole church, and he asked for forgiveness. And they had a service of healing.
Wow.
And they forgave him. He ended up joining the church. And,
Wow.
that's a hard thing to do. Now, that's not the hardest thing. I mean, I know there's a priest in the Diocese of Los Angeles. This guy was convicted of manslaughter. And he went through a whole process of restoration in his life, and also with the family of the person who died because of his actions. But he's now a priest in a congregation. And usually under all the things we put as standards, he wouldn't make it past the background check. But, this stuff's hard to do. And when we sometimes publicly forgive. One of the things I will say, we did this thing that I'm giving you for Lent, this one's called Practicing Simplicity with All Your Heart, Your Mind, Your Soul, and Strength. A lot of these are good. The one that I did, the Lent one, that kind of almost helped change my life a little bit, was the one that said practicing forgiveness. And we really got into deep with the congregation. It was 2 congregations together, and talking about how much we really don't want to do that, and how hard it really is to forgive. And that, it's easy to say, we forgive those who trespass against us. Maybe. And I will tell you, and sometime if you want to share, I'll share it. I had a major experience in my life where it was devastating. A person did something horrible to me. And, it was a devastating thing. I almost left the ministry because of it. And it took, and I will say, there was a thing where I embraced the idea of wanting to forgive him. And I took that journey, and it took me about 10 years. And finally I let go of the last part. And it just happened to be when I was doing that thing, when we were talking about it, and it really hit home and said, I got to let go of the last part. And I did. And it can be freeing. It doesn't mean I don't remember. And if I think about it too much, I get ticked off. But you know, it doesn't control me anymore. It doesn't have any power over me. You know? And I realized, you know, that this person just did this, and I just had to, you know, it's me being and building my resentment is not going to change it. You know, so that's just a kind of a personal element of it. And you know, we can talk about some more of that too, about some of this difficult stuff. So I mean, so coming up, we can talk about some things if you want to. By the way, you know, you're talking about the presiding bishop. I know sometimes a lot of things in our church, we just do stuff and you all hear about it, but a lot of you are going like, I don't know why we do this or how this. It really is okay to talk about that stuff and kind of, you know, it's not as important as are you following Jesus today, but it helps to know what you also do in your church and kind of why. So some of the things too is I know we have some people who haven't been in the Episcopal churches longer. If for some reason you want to talk about, well, why are we organized the way we are, and how do we make decisions the way we do? I'm happy we could spend a few weeks talking about that and then move on. But if that interests some of you, I know some of you know it backwards and forward. So, but if that's it, think about that, and we can have that as maybe a possibility about kind of who we are and why we do things. Or we can go into some things, and I got a couple of things I can think of, but I don't know. Any other thoughts? Because we need to kind of wrap up. You know? Well, I think I hope that you found it helpful to look at what seems to be the obvious things that we say, to have had a little time to think about these, and that, you know, again, on November 6th, I know that when I'm standing up in front of you all and I'm going to say, let us now therefore renew our vows of baptism, it's going to hit me pretty strongly this time, because the things that you have also shared have made me reflect on a lot of things. So I appreciate it, and hopefully it'll be meaning for you on that day as well. And thank you so much for all of your patience. And when I get back, we'll look about going on and see some other things that maybe are interesting for us.
Good luck tomorrow.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
They really are going to have you back on your feet and going again in 2 weeks?
Well, you know, the doctor said, the good news is you're motivated. He said the bad news is you may be a little too motivated, I was thinking. And he says, because, you know, the first 2 days, you're kind of going, he says, you know, we've given you a nerve block, and so you're kind of like, well, this isn't as bad as I thought. And he said, about that third day when that wears off, he says, I'm just telling you, realistic, you're going to go like, where is the pain medication? And he said, in fact, you should start taking it beforehand so you're not then trying to catch up. So I know there's going to be some difficult time. Part of this I go in not knowing. I do know, and I felt, this was the weird thing when he said, you've got to have a walker when you leave the hospital. I said, I'm not using a walker. I am not 85 years old and in the nursing home. And he just went, oh yeah. Yeah, you're going to need that walker. And he said, it's okay. You're not going to keep it forever. You're just going to use it. And then you'll go to a cane, and then you'll be walking. And he said, you know, and I